Welcome to Creepy, the best horror storyteller on YouTube.
John had been a writer for as long as he could remember. He had written stories of all kinds, from children's books to horror novels. But lately, he had been suffering from a severe case of writer's block. He had been trying to write a new novel, but he couldn't seem to come up with any ideas. One day, John was browsing through an antique store when he came across a strange book. It was bound in leather and had a mysterious symbol on the cover. John picked up the book and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten text in a language he didn't recognize. John took the book home and began to research it. He discovered that it was an ancient book of spells. He was hesitant at first to use the book, but his writer's block was so bad that he was willing to try anything. John flipped through the pages of the book, searching for a spell that could help him with his writing. He came across a spell that claimed to create a story that tells itself. John was intrigued. He had never heard of a spell like that before. John decided to cast the spell. He gathered the necessary ingredients and followed the instructions carefully. When he finished the spell, a blank page appeared in front of him. John watched in amazement as the page began to fill with words. John read the story eagerly. It was a dark and suspenseful tale about a writer who is obsessed with his work. The writer is so determined to write a great novel that he will stop at nothing, even if it means sacrificing his own life. As John read the story, he began to realize that it was about him. The writer in the story was just like him. He was also obsessed with his work and was willing to do anything to write a great novel. John started to feel uneasy. He tried to stop reading the story, but he couldn't. He was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. John finished reading the story and closed the book. He was shaken by what he had read. He knew that the story was a prediction of his own fate. He was doomed to follow the same path as the writer in the story. John tried to forget about the story, but he couldn't. The images of the story haunted his dreams. He knew that it was only a matter of time before his fate came to pass. John tried to ignore the story, but it was no use. It was always there in the back of his mind, whispering to him, telling him that it was all going to come true. John's writer's block disappeared. He was able to write his new novel with ease. The story flowed from him as if it was writing itself. John's novel was a success. It was praised by critics and readers alike. John became a famous writer. He had everything he had ever wanted. But John's happiness was short-lived. The story was still there, haunting him. He knew that it was only a matter of time before his fate came to pass. One day, John was driving home from a book signing when he had a car accident. He was seriously injured and spent several weeks in the hospital. When John was finally discharged from the hospital, he was a different man. He was withdrawn and depressed. He no longer wanted to write. John's friends and family tried to help him, but he refused to talk about what was wrong. He knew that the story was to blame, but he was too afraid to say anything. One day, John disappeared. He left no note or any indication where he was going. His friends and family searched for him, but he was never found. Some say that John is still alive, living in hiding. Others say that he is dead, and that his ghost is still writing the story. Whatever happened to John, one thing is for sure, the story that tells itself is a powerful force. It is a story that can lead to both great success and great tragedy. It is a story that must be told, but it is a story that must also be respected. John's fate was sealed the moment he cast the spell. The story that tells itself was a powerful force, and it was not something to be trifled with. John's novel was a success, but it was a success that came at a price. John's obsession with his work had consumed him, and he had lost everything that was important to him. John's car accident was not an accident. It was the story that tells itself, claiming its first victim. John survived the accident, but he was a broken man. He had lost his will to live, and he was haunted by the knowledge of what was to come. John's disappearance was the final act of the story that tells itself. He had become too much of a burden to the story, and it had discarded him. John may be dead, but his story is not over. The story that tells itself is still out there, waiting for its next victim. Years after John's disappearance, a young writer named Emily was browsing through the same antique store where John had found the Book of Spells. Emily was also struggling with writer's block, and she was drawn to the book like a moth to a flame. Emily took the book home and began to research it. She discovered that it was an ancient book of spells, and she was hesitant at first to use it. But her writer's block was so bad that she was willing to try anything. Emily flipped through the pages of the book, searching for a spell that could help her with her writing. She came across the same spell that John had cast, the spell that creates a story that tells itself. Emily was intrigued. She had never heard of a spell like that before. But she also knew that it was dangerous. She had read the stories about what had happened to John. Emily debated whether or not to cast the spell. She knew that it was a risk, but she was desperate for inspiration. In the end, Emily decided to cast the spell. She gathered the necessary ingredients and followed the instructions carefully. When she finished the spell, a blank page appeared in front of her. Emily watched in amazement as the page began to fill with words. Emily read the story eagerly. It was a dark and suspenseful tale about a writer who is obsessed with her work. The writer is so determined to write a great novel that she will stop at nothing, even if it means sacrificing her own life. As Emily read the story, she began to realize that it was about her. The writer in the story was just like her. She was also obsessed with her work and was willing to do anything to write a great novel. Emily started to feel uneasy. She tried to stop reading the story, but she couldn't. She was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Emily finished reading the story and closed the book. She was shaken by what she had read. She knew that the story was a prediction of her own fate. She was doomed to follow the same path as the writer in the story. Emily tried to forget about the story, but she couldn't. The images of the story haunted her dreams. She knew that it was only a matter of time before her fate came to pass. One day, Emily disappeared. She left no note or any indication where she was going. Her friends and family searched for her, but she was never found. The story that tells itself is a powerful force. It is a story that can lead to both great success and great tragedy. It is a story that must be told, but it is also a story that must be respected. Be careful what you wish for.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more similar horror stories.